Well, here we have possibly Mexico's most famous artist, right? We are looking at Frida Kahlo. We're looking specifically at Las Dos Fridas, or the Two Fridas. It's an unusually large painting for Frida Kahlo, right? This is 67 inches, which is huge. She tended to paint fairly small because I'm not going to go over her biography because I'm assuming everybody knows the biography, but because of her trolley accident, right, she was bedridden a lot of her adult life. So she tended to paint in a smaller format because it could go in bed with her, right? This, she actually does not paint in the bed. There are a couple things that we can talk about in this painting. I think they might be more relevant to the Diego Rivera painting that I'm going to show after, but I just want to bring up that Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo will be painting during the post-revolutionary period in Mexico. And this is actually, it's going to be more relevant to the specific piece that they chose for him. But right, we have the Mexican Revolution running from approximately 1910 through, depends on which historian you're reading. They'll either cut it off at 1917 with the drafting of the Constitution. Some of them will say, actually no, because they kind of still were feuding until 1920 through 21. So we have a couple of end dates, and it really depends on who you're reading. But it'll end roughly between 17 and 21, depending on who you read, right? And I'll go more into the revolution when I talk about Diego Rivera, because I think it's really relevant to his piece, a little bit less so to hers, even though it's kind of still latent in her work. So post-revolutionary Mexico, we're having, what do you know about the revolution, actually? Or should I wait until the next piece? I'm still kind of like,
Next piece.
We'll wait for it for the next piece.
Then we can see the figures.
Okay. So if we look at this painting, it's a double self-portrait, right? We have Frida Kahlo. I have a terminology. Oops, hitting the wrong one. Terminology one. There we go. So I'm showing, that's actually from her collection, that blouse. I am showing you La Casa Azul, right, her family house, which is a museum now in Mexico, about 2 years ago, had an amazing, I wish I'd gone, showing of her clothing. There are images online. If any of you are curious, you can Google it. So Frida Kahlo collected different indigenous outfits, right? Indigenous outfits from the different regions of Mexico. Right?
So indigenous, so it would have been older clothing, or just? Well,
this clothing and these textiles are still to this date being produced. Women still wear that.
Okay.
Yeah, so women will wear like Western clothing but this clothing, this is still being made today and still being worn. So this break off like we have here in the US doesn't exist in Mexico in the same way, right? That makes sense.
When you said she collected clothing, was it clothing being made at her time? Was it clothing made at her time that recalled styles earlier? Was it older pieces she was buying as sort of collector's items?
No. She wore it, so these aren't collector's items. They're not. So I said that they still make this clothing. So she collects in that she's interested in the different styles of indigenous clothing that is still being produced and used throughout Mexico. And so when we look at her different self-portraits, when she's wearing indigenous clothing, people who are very well versed in fashion and in textiles can tell you specifically what region the clothing is from. So in this case, the outfit she's wearing is from the Tehuantepec region. And the Tehuana, the woman, and it's in the terms, the Tehuana, the woman, from the Tehuantepec region, is a figure that is of interest to a lot of the artists during this period, and we see her, this just the general idea of a woman from that region, appearing in Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo paintings. Frida Kahlo a lot of times wears the clothing. The Tehuana women are very well known because it's a matrilineal society, right? So they're seen as strong women. And so we'll see the Tehuana figure in many of Diego Rivera's work. And Frida Kahlo herself then will embody the idea of the Tehuana by wearing the Tehuana outfit.
Is the one on the left, you said?
Well, it's what she's wearing, and the image on next to it is what an actual real blouse would look like, right? So you're looking at a painting of it, and then it's not the same exact blouse, but it's from the same region. It's from Frida Kahlo's collection,
Sorry,
like closet.
The blue or the white one is it?
Oh, I'm sorry, the blue.
The blue.
The white one is a European style dress.
I have a question about the blue. I've looked at that 100 times. I've never noticed that across the middle it appears that the blouse stops and the skirt starts. Is that a color patch or is that her body?
So the blouse.
It's just the trim.
So
of
do you
the
see?
bottom.
Do you see how the one in orange? There's basically it almost looks like a bib. There's like a trim that goes around it. That's why I put it next to it so that it makes sense how you see that. So that the Tehuana outfit is a kind of a boxy blouse with that kind of square embroidery. And then it's a skirt on the bottom. So it's a two-piece. In some regions, it's a full dress, right? It depends. So this is attire that would have been indigenous to the region, but is still used today, which is fascinating because there's no cutoff period.
Does indigenismo just mean it's coming from indigenous cultures,
No.
or is it a specific?
I'll talk about indigenismo in a minute. So indigenismo is more of a philosophy that was predominant during this time in which a lot of artists and intellectuals, and it emerges specifically after the revolution. And that's why I'm like, should I talk about the revolution now or not? But it emerges after the revolution because there's almost a contradictory, because at times it spoke poorly of, but other times it lifted the indigenous peoples. So it becomes kind of contradictory in that sometimes they're like, oh, these people, they need to assimilate and understand what it is to be modern, but other times they celebrate the indigenous past. So it's contradictory. But it's a philosophy that a lot of these artists will adopt in their work, and they'll celebrate the native culture or cultures and peoples of Mexico, because there's not a single, right? And so Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera are two, and I keep bringing him up because he's important in this painting. They celebrate indigenismo. She embodies indigenismo, right? She actually wears these different indigenous outfits to celebrate the various regions of Mexico in her. And Diego Rivera loved it. And so here we see like the two sides of her battling it out, right? We see her European side, right? She's dressed in that wealthy Euro style white dress with the embroidery on the hemline.
Can you remind me which side, I mean it's pointless, but which side her family came from European? Was it her mom or dad?
Her father was a German Jew, and her mom, I believe, was mixed. So her father was an immigrant. He was a photographer. And her name was actually Frida, not Frida. She made it Frida to sound more like Mexican.
Later in her life.
Yeah. Sometimes you'll see the E in it in older signatures. But we see this kind of split identity in her, right? Where we have like the European style, and this is what the wealthy women of her time, it's kind of a more of a Victorian dress, but in the Americas, fashion will kind of lag a little bit behind European.
You know, after having seen the cast paintings and then seeing this, for the first time I'm also noticing the color of her skin, because she's lighter on her European side and she's a richer color on her indigenous side.
I wonder if it's because the white background.
It could be the white background, but I think it's the skin
I don't
as
know.
well.
Her face looks a little bit darker on
I mean, I wish I could see the actual painting because we're looking at a digital reproduction, so we might be seeing more.
Where is this?
This is in Mexico. So how about we hop on a plane.
That's what we should do with the money. The last of it, just go to Mexico.
Yeah, can we write a grant to just go to Mexico to see these in person?
That'd be great.
Okay, so we have in this painting, we have the double portrait, right? We have the European Frida Kahlo on your, if you're looking at it, she'll be on your left-hand side, right? And on the right-hand side, we have the more indigenous Frida wearing her Tehuana outfit, right? What's interesting is that it's a double self-portrait, and they're attached to each other in two ways, if we look at it. One is that they're actually holding hands, but another one is, if you look at them closely, there's a vein connecting the two exposed hearts, right? So both of them have exposed hearts. And even the hearts are kind of different in the way they're being depicted. So there's the exposed hearts that are mirroring each other. The figures themselves mirror each other. The vein and the hands connect them. So here we have a detail, right, of the European side, and a vein has been cut, right? She has those surgical shears in her hand.
Clamps. I think.
Yeah, they're clamps. Yeah, thank you. I was trying to remember what those are called.
Well, it looks
The
like
shears that pinch stuff is what I was going to say, which is not really a shear that pinches stuff, but it's a clamp. Thank you. Right, so she has the clamp, seems to be trying to stop the bleeding, but that vein is bleeding onto her white dress, which makes it very, 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 very obvious.
not all that obvious, because the flowers on the trim of the dress have a similar
It's the
shape.
same color.
It is, yeah, so it takes a minute to notice that it's not another flower.
I guess so, now that you say it, you're right. I think I'm just so used to it, that to me it's like, it's obviously blood. And she's looking at us. She doesn't look very happy, right? She kind of looks miserable. And of course, this painting is one of those pieces that she made after one of the infamous divorces and breakups. A lot of them. That man made her miserable, right? So here we have the vein cut with the puddle of blood. Blood and death are fairly common themes in her work.
Pain.
Yeah,
It's a common.
pain, and I'll talk about the blood in a minute. And here we have the indigenous side. We're looking at her, and there's the vein, right? We have the vein shooting to the one side, connecting her to herself, and then there's another vein that's wrapping around her arm, going down her hand into something that she's holding. And what she's holding is a portrait of Diego Rivera as a child. It's kind of weird. And it's even wrapped in the vein, which is kind of creepy. And it looks like it looks almost like a little Victorian portrait. Right, so basically like her livelihood seems to be pumping in or out of that portrait of this man. And so this idea of veins and blood, this kind of very visceral connection to family and to her loved one is something that we see in her work come up time and time again.
So that's kind of the source of life, or she's giving life to it, you know, but then what does maybe what do you think the clamps vein represents in the European style.
What do you think?
She severed the connection for a minute.
So there's a severing of the connection. I mean, they've just gone through a divorce.
Loss and
It's such a conflicted piece, right? She loved him and hated him so much at the same time, right? He made her so happy and so miserable. I mean, this man, I'm being recorded. This man could not help himself but cheat on her. That was politically correct, right?
You know, I've never thought about the fact that she might have held a portrait in her European hand and that she's cut the portrait off. And even though she's cut off that relationship, it's killing her. I never thought about that. I mean, and I'm sorry, that was a big guess, but it's interesting to think about that the vein goes around it over here and over here.
Well,
It's gone and we
especially
just have this
because-
drifting.
Show.
Yeah, because
Oh,
he
so you're thinking-
Well,
reveres
he's
her.
depicted as a boy.
Yeah.
He's not depicted as a man.
Isn't that strange?
Boy.
And
There's this part of him that she does, that's the part that she's holding on to.
and there's some strange images in which she paints herself
Yeah.
carrying him also. There's this kind of strange relationship that they had. It was kind of very codependent. It's almost like she feels responsible for him, but he was so much older than her. And so disrespectful to her. And I mean, it's not like she was a saint. I mean, she was having her own fun because she's like, if you're having it, I will too. But it still kind of made her miserable. One thing that it's just interesting, I don't like focusing so much on how miserable he made her, right? So that's why I was talking about the outfits and the costumes and indigenismo, because I think this is really important to his social historical background to her, right, and her thinking. Because a lot of times people only focus on, oh, she couldn't have babies and he cheated on her and she was so sad. And her work is so much more complex than that.
I don't know why, but I think of her often as being a truly sad person, and joyfulness would be the exception. Don't you know people that enjoy being upset, sad? I mean, I know a few. So she seems.
It just, her life just,
Well,
she had polio as a kid, and then she got into that car accident that punctured her uterus and shattered her pelvis, which made things worse. So and some people have actually questioned if the chronic pain was actually as severe as she said, or if it was a way to gather attention. She then became an alcoholic. She'd hide liquor everywhere. It's just, and she's become such a fascinating figure, especially in the 80s and 90s, right? Hayden Herrera wrote her dissertation, which then became a book. White Castle then had a show. And then in the 90s, Madonna started collecting her.
Salma Hayek
played a sexy Frida Kahlo in a quite beautiful, not that great movie. The special effects are fantastic. The movie, the soundtrack, fantastic.
And the Lacuna is the novel that came out just a little while ago.
Didn't you guys recommend me to read that last
Yes.
time I met and I didn't?
Yes, I would. What was it?
I think some of you told me you should read this one book, and I was like, sure, and I wrote it down and never did.
That was literally
It's good.
All right, but she's kind of become this very fascinating figure, tortured soul, queer icon, because she was bisexual, right? So she's kind of become a patroness saint to many. She's been championed by feminists. She's identified with surrealism, although she herself never really did identify as a surrealist, but would totally bank off of that and be like, sure, if you want me to be a surrealist, I'll go to Paris.
There was an AP essay years ago in which the students had to look at an image of Frida and they had to say, do you think, whether she said she was or not, do you think she was a surrealist or do you think she wasn't? And they had to support their argument on either side of the issue.
Oh, that's a hard question for a high schooler.
They have to really understand
And I think they would have had to see more than just that one page.
Yeah, it's like a
Also
college
because
level
it was
question.
not.
Well, that was the question.
Oh, I remember the question,
yeah,
but
it was
I
on
mean,
the AP
the
test,
image
yeah.
they showed with the question, it seems to me it would be easier perhaps to do it where you just see this one.
It was
as
an image in
opposed
the
to
garden with the monkeys and.
And-
the
Oh, yeah, yeah.
cabbage and-
Butterfly,
Oh,
silver
yeah, I
butterfly
remember that
barrettes
question.
and, yeah, and her neck had the thorns.
The thorns
bleeding.
and the hummingbird.
Yeah, it was probably a question as much about surrealism as it was about
Yeah,
Frida.
yeah.
Are the clouds in the background, did that have?
Any meaning? No, I not that I know of. They're very similar to a lot of her other work, and unfortunately, this specific Frida Kahlo doesn't make as much reference to, but a lot of other of Frida Kahlo's paintings make a lot of reference to more traditional types of Mexican painting, right? Types of, this one doesn't. Where the clouds.
Oh, okay, thank you.
If there was one symbolism, any
But then if you
symbolism.
think, the one with her.
It's almost a
the
stormy
spinal
sky.
column that's cracking, or Dear Frida.
Yeah, and it seems to be like that. Those stormy clouds seem to be like a repeating motif. I was going to say theme, but
Which is
motif
kind of
is a better
interesting.
word.
Keep seeing it. in
Like
Greek.
this kind of stormy, that might have to do with people interpreting it so much with having to do with like feelings, emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah, hers are ectoplasmic though, I mean, they're
Yeah.
moving.
Yeah. One last question. So on the other side, on the European side,
Should I do the full one?
yeah, I'm just, or right, actually, this is
Where am I
perfect, 'cause I'm
going?
really fascinated with what Cheryl said about maybe that vein could have been connected to another portrait, right, as it is on the other side.
Yeah.
So in your opinion, do you think that that it could be that, or that she's cutting off her tie to her European side, that she's really kind of trying to embrace her Mexican side, or is she or is she leaving that up in the
I
air?
was thinking the same thing.
And is-
because Diego really revered her. I mean, this could be the argument for it, because that's what's wonderful about art history. It is
Yeah.
subjective. You can argue with it. He always revered her Mexican
Yes.
side. He did not want her to go with the European
Yes.
side. And so, I mean, that clamp could be the good argument right there, because maybe he forced her to clamp that off. Maybe she's thinking something completely different,
Yeah.
which is just a different approach if you think about the argument, twisting the argument a different way. But
Yeah, and this is and as you said, this is the beauty of interpreting artwork, is there's a certain level of subjectivity. You can't be fully subjective, because you can't just like be making stuff up, which is what happens a lot of times with student essays.
But it's all
But
spelled out, it's boring.
yeah, but if you have that visual, right,
Right.
backing, but you also have a sort of history
Right.
and biography,
Evidence.
right? You connect all of these, and that's why you'll read two essays on this piece and they'll have completely different interpretations, and it's not that they're wrong.
Right.
They're just coming from different perspectives. And so I can't give you like a single answer.
Well, your observation of the vein goes around the portrait is something I've never noticed before.
Yeah, that's true.
That really does, on the
Lead
other
you to
side,
ask,
yeah,
okay,
it-
what
yeah.
was there
because when the
before she
vein
clamped
goes
off?
around, and I hadn't noticed it.
Yeah,
before.
see, it's red, so
It
it
is.
goes kind of around, and
Is her heart cut open?
that's what so in one of them, it seems like the heart isn't just exposed, but it's also cut open, so they're not identical.
On her bodice.
Let me show it in color. Let's do the color one.
That one closed, the white one open then.
There we go. Yeah, so that part almost looks like it is like the heart itself is not just exposed, but it's open.
When she's
So that pain is, it's almost that pain from that, I guess, that rejection of that European, or right, there's so many different ways that it could be interpreted.